Welcome to the Point Noted podcast with your host, Johnny B, and co-host who shows up whenever he wants to, former NFL player, Rashad Barksdale. It's raw, unfiltered, and no topic is off limit. We talk sports, entertainment, culture, and a whole lot of random shit. Let's get to the point.
Point on that podcast. You're hanging out with your host, Johnny B. Our guest today is immigration expert, guru, master, everything you can think of. I'm glad to have Tahmina Watson on the show. Tahmina, how you doing?
Thank you so much for having me, and what a lovely intro. Thank you.
I didn't think I'd do enough. I'm sure we can go through your resume and I can start naming more titles and more honorable stuff, you know?
Oh, you're so kind.
Where are you? You in Seattle?
I'm in Seattle, Washington. I work in downtown Seattle, and I live in a place called Mercer Island, which is about 20 minutes away from downtown Seattle.
Mercer Island?
Mm-hmm.
Wow, okay. How big is that?
It's not a very big island. It's just off the, I-90 bridge, but it's a good location because it's sort of in between, the east side, what we call east side, but it's a nice central location that you can zip into town or zip onto the other side and not face too much traffic. So it's a good place.
Oh, okay. How's the weather out there? Because all of us that doesn't live in Seattle, we always hear it's always raining. Don't go to Seattle. How's the weather?
It's generally true, but today was a very nice sunny day, and yesterday was sunny too. When the sun shines, I have to say, there's no place like Seattle.
Really?
But we do endure the rain for a long period in the year to get to the sunny spot.
Well, rumor has it that you guys only say that to keep people away from coming.
Well, there is that.
And it works because for the longest time I had no interest in visiting Seattle until I had going for a wedding a few years ago. I'm like, man, it's not even raining. I've been here all week. There's been no drop of rain. I've been missing out on this beautiful place,
lies are working then.
Right. Yeah, I got to do some kayaking and enjoy myself. It was beautiful. Definitely look forward to going back out there. So you are a lawyer, immigration lawyer.
That's right.
When did you know you want to be a lawyer?
I grew up in the UK, in London, and I think whatever my first memory was, I can't remember not wanting to be a lawyer. I think I've always wanted to be a lawyer. And
Really?
in the UK, the profession is a little different to what it is here. In the UK, you can be a trial lawyer or a transactional lawyer. The trial lawyer is a barrister, and transactional lawyer is a solicitor. And I always grew up wanting to be a barrister. And I essentially became a barrister in the UK. But as I was becoming a barrister, I met my husband, who is American. And, I fell in love. I had my sleepless in Seattle moment, and then eventually moved here and retrained to be an attorney here, and eventually fell into immigration law.
Oh, okay. Nice. Very nice. Is it like a big difference between what you know about, the schooling system here in the States being a lawyer in the UK?
Very different, actually. And, COVID-19 has brought some interesting issues up for that. In the US, you go to law school for 3 or 4 years after you graduate. So it's a postgraduate degree. And in the US, once you graduate, you take the bar exams, and then you have a license to practice law. In the UK, you can actually do an undergraduate degree in law itself. You don't have to do that as in any other subject. You can go directly to law. But law school in the UK is really to teach you the practice of law, not the academics. And so, but once you finish law school, you still do not have your license to practice. You have to do an apprenticeship. And if you're a transactional lawyer, you do 2 years of apprenticeships. And if you are a trial lawyer, you do it for 1 year. So a barrister does a pupillage for 1 year, and a solicitor does a traineeship for 2 years. And after each of those practical trainings, a bit like a residence that a doctor would do, then you
Hmm.
get a license to practice. So the training process is very different. And under COVID-19, just last week, actually, there are two states in the United States, and one of them is Washington, where I live, that the local Supreme Court basically said, oh, you know what? COVID-19 means that we will waive the bar exam requirement.
Mm.
And that has a lot of mixed reaction, because
Right.
when you come out of law school, the bar exams is a way to distinguish those who would really be, you know, passing the bar exam has a lot of value, and
Right.
it, weeds out the people that wouldn't necessarily get it. And there's been debates on both sides of it, and you know. Only 2 out of the 50 states have allowed the waiving of the bar exams, but it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the next few months, because
So you
it's
are
going
against it.
I'm actually against it, because, any profession, whether it's a doctor, an architect, a nurse, a CPA, and lawyers in general, we all have to go through professional exams, because there are a
Right.
lot of professional issues you need to know and prove you know before you get into that profession. So, in my
Mm.
personal opinion, people should have bar exams, but I didn't make the decisions, and I don't really have a hand in any of that. So
Right. Right.
just going with it at
Right.
the
Well,
moment.
and you mentioned two states are so far allowing you to waive
Mhm.
those bar exams. What states are those? Do you know?
So it's our state, Washington State. I cannot remember the second one, but I can email that to you later if you wanted to,
Okay, sounds good.
share
Oh,
that.
not a big deal. Just passing along to
Mhm.
law friends I have if they want to go that route.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but but I'll ask you this: so the two states are giving you a opportunity to skip the bar. If I live in New York but they don't have a waiver, can I go to Washington State and take the bar exam? Does that work?
My guess is no. I don't know
No.
what the
Okay.
rules are. My guess is that you were doing the law degree in that particular state, and you
Okay.
were going to take the bar exams in that state. I don't really know what the prerequisites would be, but I can't imagine that you can suddenly fly over and say, "Oh, I'm here, wave me in."
Well,
But nice
there are
try. That's
those
a good
right,
question.
right. There are those out there that will try to take advantage of the situation and find a loophole in all these rules. So you never
Seriously,
know.
yeah.
So you got to ask. Somebody might be listening and say, "Hey, I know a cousin of mine that doesn't like to study. Maybe he wants to move to Washington State for a couple of months and then
Yeah.
put right and try not to take the bar." So, but if you were, like I'm sure you've dealt with law students or lawyers from the UK and from the United States. Is there do you notice like a big difference by the way in the preparation to being a lawyer?
Yes. Well, let me put it this way: yes and no. In the
Okay.
UK, when you are preparing to be, let's say, a barrister, what I was doing, I, really checked all the boxes. You have to get this experience and that experience, and you really want to check all those boxes. And those boxes are similar in the US too, but they're not necessarily exactly the same. And the terminology is different. When I was getting experiences in the UK, I was a legal assistant for many years, in their various different, law firms. And in the UK, a legal assistant is a paralegal. In the US, a legal assistant is a secretary who's, normally just photocopying. And so when
Mm.
I moved here, I only learned about this later. I was sharing my resume. I'm
Right.
legal assistant, and boom, I'm a lawyer. And, my resume, I don't think made sense to people, but I didn't really know that. And so
Right.
when I took the bar exams and I was waiting for a job, and I had also just moved here, a year before that. So I just got my green card, and I hadn't actually worked anywhere quite yet. And so while I was in between jobs, I signed up with a temping agency. And, they saw my resume and put me in a legal assistant position. In my mind, I was going to be a paralegal. And so when they
Mm,
gave me a legal assistant job, I was so excited and so happy.
right.
And I went to my first job, and they stood me near the photocopying machine. And that's when it dawned on me that my resume really reads very differently to
Right.
what I
Than most
thought it was
Americans.
reading. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It definitely does sound like a big difference there.
And then
But
there are language differences too. I mean, we all know that the UK English, US English, there are differences. We say, tomato, and, Americans say tomato. But there are actual words that are the same in legal language that mean
okay.
different things. So, for example, in the US, there is a word called remand, and in the legal world. And remand means that a higher court is sending the case back to a lower court. We're
Mm,
remanding the case back to the lower court. In the
okay.
US and in the UK, where I practiced criminal law in my very early days, remand means basically putting a hold on the case, so you're having a continuation. And the remand means you're either remanding in custody or remanding on bail, so that that client is either going to be having their case put on, is postponed until while he is in custody in jail, or while he's at home on bail. And so when I was reading for the bar in the US, I had to have a dictionary next to me, because I
Right.
was reading these sentences with remand, and I forget the other ones at the moment, and it didn't make sense to me. I was like,
Right.
that doesn't make sense. So I had to have
Right.
a dictionary. So there are differences that you wouldn't necessarily see on the face of it until you get into the nitty gritty of it.
Right. Right. Absolutely. I can see that. I can see the language barrier being there. The UK,
Hmm.
I think there's a U in color, and in the United States, there's no U in color.
Oh, for
Um,
sure. It took me a long
so
time to get used
right.
to that. Yeah. And then writing the date too, and the dates are
Right. The
so
date.
important in the legal world. You have deadlines and so forth. So it took a long time. It's okay if it's 3rd of June 2012, because
Right.
it's 3 and 6 and 2012. And while I'm thinking that's the 3rd of June, in the US, that's probably March 6th,
Right.
And so
Yep.
that there's a confusion in that way, like, what am I reading? And it's easier when it's, the digits is over 12, because then you can
Right.
make an understanding of it. But it took
Right.
a long time to,
I can only
feel
imagine.
comfortable
Right.
writing stuff.
Right. And here you are, a great writer, right? Here you are now,
Oh,
You
well,
got through all of
trying.
that. So,
Oh,
so somebody once told me that having a law degree, it's one of the most important degrees you can have anywhere, because it allows you to apply for any job. You qualify for it just based on the fact that you have a law degree. They assume you can do anything because you went through that. What would you say is the most important thing? Like, let's say you're getting a law degree, don't necessarily care about practicing or nothing like that, but to get through law school, what would be the most important thing that you think you need to have to get? Because I know, like, when you do medical school, I think you just have to have the ability to retain information because of
hmm
all the papers and things you have to read. What about law? Is it about the same thing? Is just the ability to retain, or just to be able
it's
to practice something in court? What is it?
So for law, what is interesting to know about a law degree is, yes, you have to retain information, but
Hmm.
what you learn from a law degree is critical thinking, analysis, seeing a problem and how to solve it, and how to back up your arguments. And so
Okay.
I practice immigration law, for example. One of the things I say to my clients all the time is that, yes, the immigration service is taking a form from you. It's, let's say, call it a 6-page form, and you have all these boxes to check, and you have to give them a filing fee check, money. And what they do with that form is they take your money and they put you in a bucket. But
Mm,
that form is not going to win you the case. What is going to win you the case is the evidence, the supporting evidence that you're going to provide. So, for example, you're trying to argue. my dress is red. And, you just saying that is not enough. You might need to send a photo of your dress. I was wearing a red dress that day.
Mm,
And some of the common, examples in immigration is you make enough money to support your spouse. How do you do that? You need your tax returns and you need your pay stubs and so forth. Often, immigration is, or any legal matter, is proving your point with the evidence, not
mm,
necessarily just by saying it. And you learn the skills of presenting your case in law school. And I have to say that when you're in law school in the US, you've gone through a degree and then you're doing a postgraduate degree to learn it. And so some people maybe are clued in. For me, I don't know if I was necessarily as appreciative of what I was learning until I started practicing. Because
okay.
that's when I was like, oh yeah, this is
Applying it.
why I
Right.
need it.
Right.
And so
Right.
you have to think outside the box often, and the law degree teaches you those skills, which
Those
is
skills.
why those skills are sought after no matter which job you go into.
Sure
You
you
don't
go.
have to go
Absolutely.
practicing. And if you look
Okay.
at these politicians, for example, a lot of them do have law degrees because they're learning how to present your point, how to speak in public, how to argue your case. And, learning the law is also about how to make the law,
Right.
how to use the law for the good of people. What is the problem of this community, this particular issue? How can we create laws and policies that will support the downtrodden, people who are hurting? And so the law can be used for so much. And we are in a critical time in history, particularly in America, where the last 2, 3 weeks we have seen unaccountable, illegal actions that are taken by people who are supposed to enforce the law,
Mm-hmm.
which has got people, the general public out there protesting. And
Right.
so how do we use the law for us? And therefore the law degree really can be used in multiple ways and to do anything you want, really. What do you take your passion and you'll be able to use the law that way.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, so the Supreme Court made the ruling striking down, blocking the Trump administration's plan to shut down DACA.
Hmm.
For those who don't know what DACA is, from my understanding, it's just a deferred action for childhood arrivals. Basically, it's the sins of the parents or the father, child, the kid's not going to pay for it. Is basically the way I interpret that. Is you come here with your parents illegally. That's not your problem. They brought you here. You probably have no choice in coming anyway. So, but I just want to ask you more on the DACA
Hmm.
program. Is why?
Hmm.
I mean, I don't understand why is the Trump administration so against it? Like, what? I mean, what harm is it doing, and what harm is the kids doing being here?
That's a really good question. Now, there are two separate questions. What is DACA and does the Trump administration have a problem with it?
Right,
The easier question to answer is why does the Trump administration have a problem with it? They simply have anti-immigrant policies from the get-go. And during the campaign rhetoric 4 years ago, we all remember, how the president's campaign rhetoric was really bringing immigrants down. They are
right.
rapists, there are drug dealers, we're going to have a Muslim ban, and so many things. We're going to have mass deportation. And
Mm-hmm.
essentially, they are trying to have a nationalistic view of what America is, forgetting the fact that America is a melting pot, which,
Right,
was created by immigrants. We came from all different parts of the world, and the founding fathers came from different parts of the world. If you're not Native American, then you are a descendant of an
right.
immigrant if
I'm
you're
an
not a
immigrant.
first immigrant yourself. So that's the easier thing to answer. The Deferred Action Program was created in 2012 by President Obama.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea was to essentially, basically create a pathway for children who came to the US, people who came to the US as children before a certain a timeline, and that they were younger than 31 at the time of application. And deferred action is not really a status. A status is you have permission to be here and you can work and you can attach, a status is different from a deferred action. Deferred action means we're going to defer your deportation, essentially. We're going to defer any action we take against you because you're illegal. We're going to allow you to be here. So really, there's no status that is attached to the deferred action, but it did allow people to be here, permission to be here, and permission to work, in the open. Of course, a lot of people had been working, essentially under the table. It just brought them out. And so the Trump administration, in all the policies that I had one by one, starting from the Muslim ban, the first week he was in office, to separating very small children, babies, from their parents, to grown-up children. There's been a display of hateful and cruel treatment of immigrants. But coming back to DACA, what he did was he basically pulled the rug from out of them, saying we are going to make sure that this program doesn't exist anymore, and we're going to start taking steps to not have them. And one of the reasons DACA was created is because Congress, which is, given the duty of making laws in this country, has been so divided over the last 8 years that they have not come to any bipartisan agreement in what immigration reform should look like. And the DACA recipients, who are referred to as dreamers, have been used as a pawn often, that if you let me have my billions and billions of dollars for my wall, I'll give you, some pathway for dreamers. But, immigration law, if your listeners don't know, it's really a very, very complicated system where the ankle bone is connected to the knee bone, to the hip bone, and so forth. And if you fix one thing without fixing the others, you're not going to be able to actually function still. And so this administration has used DACA as a pawn because they don't want to fix anything else. And not in the way that would be humane and necessary for the country. They only want to fix it in the way that they can try to kick people out. And so there's been this very big divide in the Democrats and the Republicans in what immigration reform really means. And that's why President Obama had to take things on, under his, wings, and essentially say, okay, well, this is deferred action is a legal pathway. It already exists in law. And so I'm going to utilize this to give a benefit to dreamers. And that's why when the Trump administration took it away, there had been a number of cases, one after another, in different states for different reasons. And there were 26 states that said, well, if you give them status, if you give them a benefit, we have to fork out money for it, and we don't want to do it. And so those cases eventually reached the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court yesterday didn't necessarily decide on whether DACA is legal or not legal. What the Supreme Court did was said, hey, you administration, you pulled the rug from out of them, but you didn't give them good enough reasons. If you're going to do that, you need to give reasons for it. And so they left DACA in place, not because they made a decision on DACA itself, but they said procedurally you were arbitrary and capricious in your actions. And now you have to, and so that's why there's been rejoice. But if people have been following the news, this morning, the Trump administration, and Trump basically tweeted, I think, is that he's gonna do more, because essentially, if he can give better explanations, and if he gives good reasons, and he follows the pathway that he's supposed to, he may be able to stop DACA again. But one of the things that people need to know is we still need to go through a legal procedure. And even if he comes with a new executive order, that is likely to be litigated again. And, before now and November, there's not enough time, at least I think, that he can stop DACA in its track right now. But what we need right in this moment is for Congress to take action. We need Congress to come together. We need all our senators, all our representatives, the House and the Senate, to come together and have comprehensive immigration reform that is bipartisan, and that is humane and is fit for a modern 2021 era. The law that we have is from 1950s and 60s. They're so old. And if you think about your phone, for example, if you had a phone in the 1990s, it was a brick. And
Yeah,
if you
and
had a
it's not working today. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, and if you have a phone today, your phone is doing everything for you.
Right,
It's your camera, it's your note taker, it's your video, it's your TV, it's
right,
everything. If you just think
hmm
about the phone, how modern has it become in just 20 years?
right,
Yet our law has not kept up with technology, the modern day of working, the systems that we have, and there are just so many things that have changed that require the law to keep up. And that's why we're failing as a system and many things. We could be in a much better place economically if we had a better immigration system. And
right,
so this is an opportunity, and I'm very much a glass half full person, that this is an opportunity for people to come in and say, okay, we're the lawmakers, we're going to fix this now, because if we don't, Trump is going to take this away again.
right.
And we'll see. So it's a very interesting question. I'm so glad you brought it up, but it's not over yet. Even though there was a lot of rejoice yesterday, we still have to continue to advocate. Still got to continue to talk to our senators, our
Right,
representatives, and we've got to get the value of DACA folks as well as immigrants in general out there. COVID-19, I don't know if you were going to ask me this, but I'll just give you this example since we spoke about the phones. COVID-19 brought unprecedented challenges for all of us, you, me, anybody
right,
listening. Suddenly you're working from home. You may not have
hmm
had a setup for working from home, but if you
right,
have children, your children are now schooling from home,
mm
homeschooling. And that homeschooling is, for a lot of us, dependent on the internet. A lot of our children have had Zoom meetings with their teachers. Teachers are emailing us. Content for schooling. And how do you even work? It's unprecedented challenges. And if you didn't have immigrants who are farming still, getting our fresh vegetables that were now in the grocery store, the only place we can actually go, we wouldn't have food on the table. If we
mm
didn't have the internet functioning in the way that it is, with our phone networks, cable companies working on it, we would not be able to work remotely. But who are the people managing these? There are a lot of high skilled immigrants who are working behind the scenes that you don't even think about. If
right,
you pick up your phone again, that hardware, software, and network, none of these would be functioning sufficiently if we didn't
right,
have high skilled immigrants who are working behind the scenes. And if you think about entrepreneurs, people who have come to this country and built big companies, have hired people who have had jobs. And so immigrants really are the backbone of how society works. Yet this administration is not appreciating that. And, COVID-19 has also been a vehicle for this administration to fulfill some of the agenda that he has not been able to get through because Congress has stopped it. So, for example, you may remember this word. Do you remember the word chain migration?
chain migration. Yep.
You remember
hmm
that? And before, the Trump administration came into office, did you really know that word? Probably didn't. And
No,
so he came in and this became, regular language, chain migration.
of
He
course.
didn't want family based immigration to continue, even though the president's wife and in-laws and,
All
other people in
immigrants.
his
Right,
are immigrants. And so he wanted to stop family immigration. And the Muslim ban was one way of doing that. But he couldn't do that through Congress and various bills that he had presented. COVID-19 struck, and suddenly there's a suspension of immigration. But
mm
that suspension was particularly for parents, for adult children and siblings. These were the criteria that he really didn't like in the chain migration scenario. So
mm.
COVID-19 has become a vehicle for getting some of the agenda out there. And what we're
Right,
expecting today, I am expecting a 5 p.m. bad news. By the way, this administration releases bad immigration news generally on a Friday, 5 p.m. And
Jeez.
so I'm bracing myself for today. I've got my
Wow.
drinks and everything ready, that he is going to have a travel ban, COVID-19 travel ban on non-immigrant visas. That means H-1B visas,
Hmm.
H2 visas, L visas. We don't know the complete array of visas that are going to be affected, but we know he hates student visas. We know he hates H1Bs. We know he hates these types of visas, and we're expecting a ban to come down. And so we'll have to see what happens. But COVID-19 has been a vehicle for him to get his agenda out there.
Wow, that's going to be really hard, especially for India and all the IT supply for the United States.
Very
If
much
the
so.
H1 visa actually gets banned, and in your conversation, I know you mentioned how we have to make bipartisan laws and how things have to change in Congress. And the one thing that struck my mind was, one of the problems we have is, you know, we're a country with about median age being about 30 something, but we're being ruled by a bunch of men in their 60s. So it's
Thank you
kind of
very
hard,
much. Thank you
you
very
know,
much. Yes. I mean, that's a
it's
big problem. They do
right.
not represent the population that we have now and the values
They
that we have.
exactly right, right. So that makes it hard because the way they see things is from the old men, the old women's point of view, and they refuse to change. Like Joe Biden refused to change about things he said. He
Mhm,
apologized about things the way he felt back then. Which tells me he still feel the same way.
mhm,
Just not gonna make that a big deal, but
mhm,
so and I think that's what has to change. In the we've had a lot of people come on the podcast. They're like running for Senate and Congress, and they all like in. I mean, I had a 25-year-old woman that came on. I had a 21-year-old college student.
mhm,
We had all this mid-30s. Just good to see the young folks, just
mhm.
that wave again, getting back, and hopefully those guys can make it far enough to start affecting changes. One more
Yes.
thing. Go ahead.
I don't want to, I mean, AOC,
Yeah.
the New York House representative,
Right.
I mean, Alexandria Cortez, she's definitely
Mm-hmm.
an example of the type of age group that we should be looking at, and the
Yep.
uh, um, vitality of people that we need, and people
Right.
who really will fight for us. I mean, and
Yeah.
so, yes, I
Absolutely.
100% agree with you. We're not represented
Absolutely.
properly.
Not well. And AOC, if you're listening, we love you on the show. Please come on the show.
Yes, please come to the show. We
Please
would love
come to
to
the
hear from
show.
you.
We would love to hear from you. I interviewed one of the senators up here, and she was like, she was endorsed by AOC, so I was like, please tell AOC to come on the show. And she
Well,
was
I
like,
hope she listens to this.
hopefully she is. But just to talk about DACA, I have one more question to myself, and then I have a question from a fan. So we mentioned DACA being a deferred action, not a status, right? Is there
Mhm.
anything in the plan, even though I know the president's administration is fighting to pretty much knock down DACA right now, but I mean, is there a plan to eventually go from deferred action to just having these people have a legal status, like a permanent resident type of thing? Is that a plan for that? Is that where this is supposed to be going?
Yes, and so that is exactly what we want Congress to do, and only
Okay,
Congress can do that.
can do that.
Because when somebody has status, it's given through law. The law has to, have it in black and white.
Right.
And because we have not had that agreement between the Democrats and the Republicans for all these years, we have not been able to get that status on paper, and that is why, because Congress doesn't make any decision, particularly when the word immigration gets into it.
Mm,
That's why President Obama did what he did, and this is why President Trump is writing executive orders left and right, because
okay.
he's essentially saying, "This is my power. I am going to
Right.
do this, and this is within the executive powers I have." So he's pushing the boundaries of what executive power is, which is
Right.
why there's just litigation after litigation saying,
Mm,
"No, you do not have the authority." But
to
you're
do that.
absolutely right. That is the path we need to go towards, but only Congress can give it
Can
to
do that.
us.
Yeah. And if you are listening, President, please come on the show too. So here's a question I have for you. I'm going to read this question that I have. And the gentleman says, I'm a DACA recipient and now I'm married to a citizen. I'm in the middle of the green card process. What are the chances of attending the interview here in the United States and not in my country?
That's a really good question. If under the DACA program, before the rug was pulled from under their feet, there was a process in which DACA recipients could actually leave the country on something called advanced parole, which means
Okay.
we're going to give you permission to travel outside the country. And if you
Mm,
were to come back in the country after that short trip, your status is changed on paper. You have now been seen by an immigration officer as you entered the country, and that gives you the privilege to get a green card in the US without leaving the US, if that makes sense.
right.
Now, if a DACA recipient such as your listener has been in the US since he was a little child and hasn't left the country after receiving DACA, when the time comes for an interview, he actually does need to go outside the country to get the green card. Because what happens is you have to be inspected at the time of arriving in the US. If you do not get inspected, that means an immigration officer saw you, looked at your passport, said, gave you permission to come in. That's called inspected. And a lot of times, the people who are DACA recipients were not inspected. They had
Mm,
come into the US, as a child, parents, cross the border. And if that's the situation of this person, then they do have to leave the country potentially. And this is a generic, situation. Please do not take it as legal advice, but this is a
right.
generic situation of what happens. However, if that DACA recipient had come from, let's say, the UK, like who was that celebrity from Chicago? He's a rapper, I think. I forget the name of him. There are people who come to the US as children legally, like they got on a plane with their parents and then stayed here. The difference between that person and a child who crossed the border with mom and dad is that they were inspected. The person who got on the plane and got here and then just stayed here, never left after their
Right.
permission was expired, that person can still get a green card without leaving the country.
Okay.
So the key difference is, how did you enter the country? Were you inspected or were you not inspected? If you were
Mm,
not inspected, you have to leave the country and get a green card. If you were inspected, generally you can get a green card while being here. But there are
okay.
nuances in that, but that was a generic overview.
Okay. All right. I have another one for you. And this says, I've been in the United States for 30 years, married with 4 kids. I went through a divorce. I got a DUI. I want to apply for my citizenship, but I haven't yet. Would the DUI affect me being a citizen? He came here illegally, he has his green card and all of that. He just never applied for his citizenship and been here over 30 years. So he's saying, would it matter that I have a DUI? Would that affect me, or would I need a lawyer?
It's a
Uh,
it's a very good question, and again, this is not legal advice to him directly. This is generic guidance.
Generic, right, right.
When you have a DUI, it doesn't make you what's called inadmissible, meaning that you cannot be in the US. So for somebody who has a DUI, they can still actually get citizenship, but there are
Okay,
timings involved. When did you have that um, charge against you? When did you have that conviction? When was the sentence over? There are some timelines involved. And
okay,
so for this listener, the answer is generally yes, and he should take all his documentation and go to see a lawyer to confirm all of these timelines and whether he can apply now. If he's been in the US and this DUI was a very long time ago, chances are he could be eligible now. And one of the things I say to anybody who's eligible for citizenship already is they really should apply for citizenship. If
right.
you've been here for so long, do you really see yourself living outside
Anywhere
anywhere?
else, right?
You know?
Impossible, right?
You have your life here, your work here, your children here. Chances are you'll be here. But there are reasons why people don't do it. They feel strongly about their own country, or they might be losing their citizenship, like India, China. They say, if you take citizenship elsewhere, we're not going to, let you come, keep our citizenship. So there are practical reasons. But, really, there are so many many security reasons for getting citizenship. If you have a DUI, for example, or DUI could become a big, if accidentally become a much worse situation. What if somebody died in that accident? That's a different scenario altogether, and that becomes, I forget the names of these charges, but it's could be some sort of unintentional murder of some sort of homicide charge could, and that's inadvertent. You never intended to do that. But bigger criminal charges can actually even get your green card at risk. But a simple issue of going to travel because your parents might be sick and you've been
Right.
outside the country for over 6 months or maybe over 12 months, you
Right.
now are at risk of losing your green card. But the biggest thing is that if you're living in this country and you've been here for 30 years, your children are going to school, the school district. You might have some opinions about how your children are being schooled. You might have
Right.
opinions about your local area, about the trash, or are they taking it out in time? Or you might want to, there are voting rights that come with citizenship. And if there was any reason to get citizenship, it's to have your voice heard. You
Have the
cannot
voice
have your
heard.
voice heard unless
And you're
you
not
are
a
a
citizen.
citizen. So I
Right.
would urge anybody that's listening that if you're eligible for citizenship, go just apply. It
Go.
might take a long time. And there are two other reasons for getting citizenship. By the time you're ready to apply for citizenship, processes and procedures might have changed. That person who's been here as a green card holder for 30 years,
Mm-hmm.
when he was, first eligible, it might have been a 3-page form, but now it's a 20 plus page
Mm.
form that is very complicated,
Right.
and the fees have gone up, slowly, and they are actually scheduled to go up. They're going to double or triple, actually. The current fee for the government is just under $700.
Mm.
They are going to become, I forget what it is, it's double or triple and it's going to happen pretty soon, anytime between
Jeez.
June
Wow.
and November, and probably closer in the summer than the fall, because now USCIS, the agency that gives immigration benefits,
Mm-hmm.
have said that, we're running out of money. We're going to have to furlough 1,000 people, and we just don't have, you have to bail us out. And so there are many reasons for people to just use the law as it is. Don't wait for the law to get worse when it comes to your turn. And so I urge people to apply for citizenship if you are eligible.
Okay. Absolutely. And hopefully, any of the listeners that wants to go to Tahmina Watson Immigration, they would get some point of the podcast discount. Uh,
Yes, we'll do that.
yeah,
We'll do that. Mhm.
absolutely. I have another question. So this one says, I've been in the U.S. for over 10 years. Um, when I filed for my fiance out of country, it took about 2 years to get her here. Is there a reason why the process takes so long? Because I've heard other people that actually gone through this. Is there a way to make that a much more quicker process?
That's a really good question. And that processing time actually does fluctuate. And it depends on when this person had gone through the process. There are two ways in which, your loved one can come to the US, either on a fiance visa. And, there's actually a show called 90 Days Fiance, if anybody's interested.
Yeah, I heard
But,
it.
it's an interesting concept. And they're showing the lives of people, not necessarily the legal process. But for the person to come to the US, the US citizen, and only a US citizen can apply for a fiance visa, has to apply and show that they are eligible to marry, they have a promise of marriage, and they have all the things that the government wants to see. And it goes from, USCIS, this big agency in the US, and
Hmm.
it goes to this timeline. And think of I just, in my head, it's a factory, and they could go, you make a pile of cases. And, if you imagine how many cases get filed every day, your case is really at the bottom of a very, very, very big pile. And
Right.
for them to get to you, it takes that much time. But once USCIS gets to you, when you become at the top of the pile file, if that makes sense, it's already been a year plus. And when your case has been approved, it then has to go to the embassy, and there is a lot more time involved in that. From going from point A to B, there are procedural steps that happen internally, and once it gets to the embassy has its own 10 steps to take. And so all of that adds up to approximately 2 years at the moment. And that's for a fiance visa. If you were already married, the process is very similar too. You file for the form in the US, and eventually it goes to a middle agency that collects a lot more documents again, and that middle agency sends it to the embassy. The embassy does its own 10 steps process, and I'm just saying 10 steps to make it easy to understand, but
Right.
there are whatever steps they need to take, and all of that again amounts to 2 years. But remember, COVID-19 has shut down all the embassies around the world, and they have been shut since what, March, I want to say. And so imagine all the cases that had to be postponed between March and June. Now it's June, end of June. They still haven't opened. That's 3 months of cases. And so all of this backlog is definitely going to add to anybody who's still waiting. And we
Mm,
really don't know what processing times will look like once we come out of COVID-19. So two
right.
years could become three, potentially,
Wow.
longer. We really
Right.
just don't know. We have to wait and see. But I
Right.
will say that we have a blog on our website called Watson. If you go to our website, watsonimmigrationlaw.com,
Mm-hmm.
subscribe to our blog. We write about these things all the time because these are the issues that are important to our clients. And there's just so much news out there that you don't necessarily know what applies to you and what doesn't. You'll see an executive order today or in the next week, and suddenly you'll be like, gosh, does that travel ban apply to me? And so we write about these things because all of these things apply to our clients. Not every single one person is affected by every single problem, but we
Right.
write about it so it's understandable. So I would invite your listeners to sign up to our blog at Watson Immigration Law.
Absolutely. WatsonImmigrationLaw.com. You guys go ahead and sign up to that so you can get some blog information, and you have a lot of good information on there. Um, so I have another question for you regarding just bringing people over.
Hmm.
Uh, is that Do I need to have a certain amount of money in the bank, certain type of job in order for me to apply to bring a friend over from another country, to bring a relative over, a cousin over, or even a fiance, like we just talked about? But more importantly, anybody, a friend, a cousin, a relative. Do I need to have some amount of money in the bank? Do I need to have a certain type of job? Is
Hmm.
it like what is required for me to do that, or just being a citizen is sufficient enough if I can get him here and tell him I can take care of him?
That's a really good question. So I'm going to go back to chain migration again. Um,
Okay.
only certain people, certain US citizens can apply for certain people. So if you have one of the misinformation that this administration had spread with the word chain migration was suddenly there was this misunderstanding that you can apply for anybody. And the
Mm,
answer is you cannot apply for your friend and your cousin and your grandma and, anybody that you would like. It's only
okay.
limited to certain relatives, your parents, your siblings, your children.
Mm,
And so you cannot apply for that aunt who's, the love of your life. You simply cannot do that. And you cannot
mm,
apply for your grandma. And so if you have the friend you want to sponsor, you cannot sponsor for a green card. Um,
mm.
so the who you can sponsor is already limited. In terms of funds, yes, absolutely. It has always been a fundamental requirement that if you are helping a family member migrate to the US, you have to be financially responsible for them. And that is an age old law. It has always been there. You, as let's take Johnny, if you had your mom in, let's say, in India, you would have to show that you are earning X amount of money. Now, what is X amount of money? The You have to show that you are making 125% over the poverty guideline. So
Okay.
there is a chart that is given out every year depending on various economic factors. And I can't remember what the current numbers are, but it's done by household. If it's Johnny and your wife, there are two people in your house, but you're going to be sponsoring your mom in India, you have to look at the household number of three. What is the income, the minimum income that you need to show for three people in that house? And
Okay.
so forth. So let's say I have my husband and my two children. I have already a family of four, and I'm sponsoring my mom. I have to look at the line item for household of five people. Am I
Mm,
making enough money for that? And for five people, it's probably $37,000 a year. That, for example, it's not, you don't have to be working at Apple and T-Mobile and all of those high-tech jobs.
right.
For example. So that has been the age old law. But February 24, 2020, after much litigation, just because, this guy, as I talked about executive orders and memos and regulations that were drafted without Congress, this administration put into place a new regulation, which is commonly known as public charge. That means that the administration doesn't want to see anybody who's coming to the US ultimately go to the public pocket to get, food stamps and housing benefits and so forth. So they want to see that not only you, the sponsor, Johnny, the sponsor, is sponsoring mom. They don't only want to see
Right.
your income, they still want to see that. But now they want to see mom's income. But not
Mm,
limited to income only. They want to see mom's health, her age, her skills, her education, her language abilities, and a number of things. And so, as of February 2020, the bar to what you need to show financially has shot up exponentially.
oh,
And it is designed to deny cases. And there are two ways of getting green cards. Earlier you talked about your DACA example. If that
right.
person is in the US for the interview, there's one particular form to show for him of his income, his savings, and that's going to include show me your credit report, show me, your education documents. The credit report is one of the biggest hurdles because if you've been in the US without a social security number or real income that is on the table, it's difficult for you to have a credit score. And just having these simple things. And if you're at the embassy, you don't necessarily need to show the credit score and so forth. So the documentation is a little bit less. But the standard of looking at you as an individual and just making a subjective, opinion that, oh, I think you're going to claim public benefits
Mm,
sometime in your life. And the test is not today, the test is any time in your lifetime. And so the people that are most at risk are older people and younger people.
right.
Um, and so, because this was implemented just before the world stopped through COVID-19, we don't know what this is really going to look like when officers actually look at the paperwork. And so we will know the repercussion of the new rule, I would say sometime at the end of the year, beginning of next year. And we will very likely see a high number of denials because they only
Wow.
need to pick on one of these things. And it's designed to deny. It's not designed to say, oh really, we want you here. So again, it goes towards the mission of this administration to cut immigration, basically, and this alone will cut immigration big time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I got one more for you. Before we dive into some more fun stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so a user said, if I get married to an American citizen today, let's say Monday, I get married to an American citizen on Monday, and I get arrested Friday, can I be deported?
Yes and no. It depends on how you entered the country, firstly.
Okay.
So if you came here on what's called, people generally refer to it as ESTA. And so if somebody came, ESTA means that you just showed your passport, and the United States and your country has an agreement, and each other can show each other's passport to just go there and just have a visit. And so, for example, when you go to Canada, most of your listeners might have gone to Canada, you just show your passport and come back. And Canadians can do the same. And so that process, not necessarily for Canadians but other countries, it's called visa waiver. And the waiver means you're waiving a lot of rights, and waiving those rights also includes being in front of a judge. So in theory, this administration has definitely used this more and more. They can do something called expedited removal. So the arrest by itself doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be deported. The arrest means that, and there has been a lot of litigation on this issue, that ICE can be informed. And you might have heard the word sanctuary city.
Yep.
And that has been part of the general vocabulary over the last 3 years.
Right.
Sanctuary city has really been that whether the local police are cooperating with ICE. And a lot of cities will either tell ICE that we have somebody without status or, immigrant here. And those in the sanctuary cities, they don't necessarily have the cooperation with ICE. So how you entered is one of the issues, but what happens to you will also depend on where you live. But let's say you are arrested and now you are going to immigration court. By virtue of being married, you are showing you have a ground of relief, meaning you have a pathway to getting a green card. And often that will allow some time to take some steps to file the paperwork that is necessary to potentially get you out on bond. So that scenario could have a number of outcomes based on a number of different factors. And so it's a case by case scenario.
Okay.
And so there's no real, this is definitely the way this is going to go, because it really will depend on those case by case issues.
Right. So best advice really to add to it is just stay out of trouble.
Yes, definitely stay out of trouble. And a lot of people come to the US and they do fall in love, and
Of
they
course.
eventually want to get their green card while being here. And one of the changes that also happened under this administration is, intent. When you come to the US, let's say as a tourist, you have the intention of being a tourist. The intention is to temporarily visit, go to Hawaii, go to Disneyland, go wherever, see your family, your friends, and then go back home. That's your temporary intent. But you might have also come to see a loved one, some with a romantic relationship, and you might have come and gone to the US many times, but suddenly this is the right time to get married.
Right.
And often, if you change your mind, there is something called the 30-60-day rule, that if you got married after 60 days, then it was presumed you really didn't have that intent when you arrived.
Okay.
What this administration did
Interesting.
was they changed that 60 days to 90 days, saying if
Uh,
you changed your mind within 90 days, then we will assume that you came here with this intent. And the 90 days is very interesting, because I just mentioned to you visa waiver, people who are coming just waving the passport, so to speak, they only will have 90 days to be here. And so they took that timeline and were strategic in increasing that period in which they can impute intent, meaning they're going to presume that you had intent. And so when it comes to immigration law, not only are you looking at how you entered, you are also looking at when you entered and when you intend to get married and all of these things, because it can make or break your case.
right. Right. Wow. That I did not know that. I have to definitely pass those numbers up there. 30, 60, and now you say 90.
Yeah, so really, people should walk away thinking, the intent issue is, if you change your status, let's say you even came here as a tourist and you got a job, not just to get a green card, you get a job here, and you came here on a B2 visa because you were given, 6 months to stay here, and then
Right.
you get a job. You cannot, if you try to apply to your visa status to change to a work visa, and you did that within the 90 days, that also will have problems because they'll say, well, you came here to get that job.
To get that
And
job, right?
so intent is so critical. In whatever visa category that you have, you must maintain that intent at the time of arrival. Um,
Mm,
and so, people should definitely consult an immigration attorney, um, before they take any steps. But one of the things that, it just occurs to me to tell you, I don't know if you'll ask me this later, but it occurs to me to mention it. When you're here in the US as a tourist, COVID-19 has brought a different issue that people haven't necessarily realized yet. Um, there is a big correlation between tax laws and immigration laws. For immigration purposes, if you're in the you cannot be in the US for more than 6 months, in different scenarios, particularly as a tourist. But and you leave the country, you left the country and you're all good. But
right.
for tax purposes, if you're here for more than 6 months, I don't know what those timelines are, you can be subject to US taxes just as a
Mm,
tourist.
okay.
And so a lot of people who have come here and then got stuck because they couldn't get on their plane back, their countries have stopped, letting people in. That COVID-19 has brought up a lot of different practical issues. And there are simply no flights, or if there is a flight, it's going through a stopover at a country where you can't stop. You're not allowed to
Right.
go there. These
Right.
practical difficulties are actually going to make people stay here longer than they really intended, and that can have tax consequences. And, I'll take a moment to do a plug for my own podcast, which is called Tamina Talks Immigration. And I will be releasing a podcast episode in the next few weeks in which I talk to a tax accountant who will be
Okay.
talking about some of these issues. What are the consequences of, your tax liability, even if you think you have no tax liability at all because you're
Mm,
a tourist?
okay. Wow. All right. Interesting. Yeah, I would definitely have to catch that episode. I'm glad you brought up the tax information because I was going to ask you about, you visiting the United States and you have the ability to work,
Hmm.
and you make some money. Obviously, you pay tax when you get your paycheck during the time that you're here. But how can you file for tax when you were gone?
Hmm.
Because your visiting time is over. Are you still required to file for tax for the time that you were here, even though you're no longer in the States?
Well, one thing I will add as a prerequisite, when you're coming here to the US, you will be designated the visa type. And if you are here on a tourist visa, you are not allowed to have any intention to live here or any intention
Right.
to work here. And therefore, if you come here as a tourist, absolutely do not work and absolutely do not intend to live here. But work is an absolute no-no. People,
No,
if you
no.
get found out, you will be banned from coming back again. And so in those
Right.
scenarios, you simply cannot work. But if you have a work visa, you are allowed to work and you do need to pay taxes. One of the questions that has come up, interestingly enough, in the COVID-19 scenario is I'm here on a work visa, and I am suddenly not working. What are my options? And also, can I claim unemployment taxes, benefits? Now, the first part to that is, can I stay here? Typically, the answer is maybe.
Mm,
Because if you are on a work visa in the US, you have to be working to be in status.
okay.
And in some visa categories like H-1B, if you've been terminated, you are allowed to be here for 60 days. That's called grace period. So that's a very tight, it's a hard deadline. You cannot be here for more than 60 days without working, but you can be here. And so that follows the question of, can I claim unemployment benefit? And the answer has been yes, because unemployment benefits is money has been taken out of your paycheck and
Right.
put into that little, jar from which you are now collecting. So unemployment benefits are allowed, but some of it depends on your state as well. But the bigger question that has come from that is, okay, yes, I'm allowed to get unemployment benefit, but will that make me a public charge? You and I just spoke about the public charge issue, the new rule that went into effect in February.
Hmm.
And the answer is that, you know, the unemployment benefit should not make you a public charge because that is
Right.
not necessarily public money. However,
Right.
some states have public funds in those insurance. So it's a good idea to check with somebody who knows. So it's a generic answer I'm giving.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, unemployment benefits should not make you a public charge.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. I'm pretty sure a lot of people listening will benefit from hearing this information and getting those details. Tamina, I truly appreciate your time. I mean, I feel like I have so much, learned
Mm.
so much, and can go on and talking about immigration law.
And I could talk all
Uh,
day too. Keep it coming and I'll give you the answers.
exactly, which is more reason why I got to tune to your podcast as well, so I can learn more stuff. But I'm pretty sure I would love to bring you back, and we can do more. You know,
Oh, I would love that. I
I
would
would
love that
have.
you've asked some really interesting questions. And I'll also tell people that I'm actually working on a podcast series that will be released in July sometime. We're
Okay.
working on them. And it's going to be a very interesting series because it's not necessarily going to be focused only on immigration and immigration law itself, but it's going to
Okay.
focus on some of the lawyers who have made big differences and impacts
Okay.
in a very meaningful way in our communities that have been, suffering from the new policies that this administration has
Wow.
been throwing at
Wow.
us. So I would love for your listeners to join in. I would love for you to listen. And when that comes
Absolutely.
up, it will be an interesting listen for anybody, actually.
Absolutely. I would definitely join the blog so I can get those information. I have all your contacts and all your people's contacts, so we'll be able to exchange emails. So I'll stay updated enough to know on what's going on with that podcast, and I can start sharing it with my listeners as well. But
Mhm.
I truly appreciate you taking your Friday afternoon when you can be at home, relaxing, having a glass of wine. You're here talking to me, so thank you so much for doing that.
Oh,
I
it's my
appreciate it.
pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. It's been an honor to speak with you, and I look forward to staying in touch. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And before we go, Tamina, go ahead. What was that website again? If people want to find you, if they have more questions, because I know I have a couple of people that would definitely trying to get more information and probably contact your office. Where should they go to find more information and get a hold of you?
Thank you so much for asking. Well, they can definitely follow me on social media, but my website is the one-stop shop, which is www.watsonimmigrationlaw.com. It will have my blog, it will have my podcast, it will have my book that you can buy on Amazon or Barnes and Noble and where other places. And we love talking to people and staying in touch. And you can follow us. We have a Facebook page for both of our law firm as well as
Mm,
our podcast. And on the
okay.
Facebook page, we will often talk about the guests that we're going to have and so forth. That's where we do our communication for our
Okay.
podcast. So we would love for people to sign up to any and all of them.
Okay. Sounds great. WatsonImmigrationLaw.com. Tamina, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Johnny. I really appreciate it. Bye.
Okay. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to the Point Noted Podcast with Johnny B and Rashad B. Follow us on Twitter at PTNoted and Instagram at Point Noted. Hit the subscribe and follow button to follow us and check out more episodes of us talking a whole bunch of shit. You've been noted.